Today we're reading chapter 27 called Carefree. I just read chapter 26 last night called The Town of the Bards, where Emrys and Shim found a village where no one spoke, and then they ran into a little girl who they thought that she would offer them shelter, but it turned out she was a shifting wraith and attacked them, so they got injured. Anyway, chapter 27, Carefree. The little light remaining fled swiftly. We settled for the night by the barely trickling stream a few hundred paces from the remains of the shifting wraith. Each consumed by his own thoughts, neither of us spoke. While Shim stared hard at the eroded banks to make sure that no deadly creatures hid there, I mixed a poultice from my satchel of herbs. The herbs smelled vaguely of thyme, and beetroot, and brownwood. Gingerly, I patted the poultice on the claw marks on my arm, knowing full well that she would have done so much better. I tried to hum to myself one of her soothing chants, but couldn't remember more than a few notes. I knew, as the darkness submerged us, that my second sight would soon be no help at all. I laid down my staff and leaned back against a rotting tree stump, the dagger clutched in my hand. I hefted the narrow blade that had slain the wraith. Had Han used it in his labors, or had he carried it just for protection? Either way, I was now twice indebted to him. A few faint stars began to appear overhead. I tried to search for some of Rhea's constellations, made not from the stars but from the spaces between them. I thought of the Shamora tree, heavy with fruit, the writing on Arbasa's walls, the crystal cave all aglow. Yet all that seemed so long ago, so far away. To my disappointment, the stars were so few and so scattered that I found no patterns at all. Then I realized that even those stars were not growing brighter as the sky darkened. They seemed shrouded somehow, and not by clouds, at least not by ordinary clouds. Something held them back, kept them from lighting this land. At that moment, I sensed a faint, smoky smell in the air, as if a fire burned nearby. I sat upright, straining my second sight, but I found no flame anywhere. Stranger still, I noticed that a vague circle of light brightened the area where we lay upon the ground. It came not from the dimly lit stars, but from somewhere else. What else could be shining down on us? Puzzled, I looked closer. Suddenly I understood. The gentle illumination came not from above, but from below. It came, in fact, from the rotting tree stump. I rolled away. Cautiously, I took a closer look. I noticed a glowing circle in the top of the stump, as though a door had been cut in the wood, allowing the ring of light to shine through. "Look here, Shim." My companion strode over. Seeing the glowing stump, he sucked in his breath. "Now I is sure we camped in the wrong place." "I know, but this light feels good somehow." Shim frowned. "The snakely girl feels good at first, too." Then, without warning, the door popped open. From it emerged a shaggy head with a tall brow and dark, observant eyes. The head of a man. The eyes, deeper than pools, gazed at me, then at Shim for a long moment. "All right," said the stranger in a low, resonant voice. "You can come in, but I don't have any time for stories." The head disappeared down into the trunk. Shim and I exchanged looks of bewilderment. Stories? What could he mean? At length I announced, "I'm going down there. Come with me or stay here, as you choose." "I stays," answered Shim decisively, "and you should forget this foolery and stays too." "It's worth the risk if it means we won't have to camp out in the open." As if to emphasize my point, the distant howling resumed. "Supposing this man becomes another snakely snake? Supposing you was trapped down in this hole?" I did not answer. I peered through the door and into a narrow tunnel. Although it was well lighted, which restored my second sight, all I could see from this position was a rough-hewn ladder leading downward. I hesitated, pondering Shim's warning. The howling swelled in volume. Clutching my dagger in one hand, I put my feet into the entrance and began to climb down. I noticed as I descended that the wooden rungs were heavily worn, as if hundreds of hands and feet had entered by them, and, I hoped, left by them. Down I climbed, one rung after another. Soon a leathery, musty smell drifted up the tunnel. It was a smell that excited me, for I had encountered it only one place before, in the Church of St. Peter at Caer Meardin. The farther I descended, the stronger it became. It was the smell of books. When at last I reached the bottom, I stared in astonishment, for hundreds and hundreds of volumes surrounded me. They covered the walls and floor of this underground room from end to end and top to bottom. Books everywhere. Books of all thicknesses, colors, heights, and also languages, judging from the varied scripts and symbols on the cover. Some bound in leather, some so tattered that they wore no covers at all. Some formed papyrus rolls from the Nile. Some made of pergamentium from the land of the Greeks called Anatolia and the Romans called Lesser Asia, with the feel of sheepskin. Books sat in rows on the sagging shelves that lined the walls. They lay stacked in piles on the floor, so many that only a narrow path remained from one side of the room to the other. They huddled in a mound beneath the heavy wooden table, itself cluttered with papers and writing supplies. They even covered most of the bed of sheepskins in the corner. Across from the bed, a small but adequate pantry held shelves of fruits and grains, breads and cheeses. 2 low stools sat to one side and a hearth to the other. The hearth crackled with a flame bright enough to light the living space, as well as the tunnel leading to the stump above. Next to the fire sat a cauldron made of iron. Bowls, grimy with leftover food, lay stacked beside the cauldron, perhaps in the hope that given enough time they might eventually wash themselves. Sitting in a high-backed chair by the far wall, the long-haired man sat reading. His tangled brows, streaked with gray, sprouted like brambles above his eyes. He wore a flowing white tunic, with a high collar that nearly touched his chin. For a moment or two, he did not seem to notice that I had joined him. I put the dagger back into my satchel. The man did not move. Feeling uncomfortable, I cleared my throat. Still, the man did not look up from his book. "Thank you for inviting me." At this, the man stirred. "You are most welcome. Now, would you mind shutting the hatch to my front door? Drafts, you know. Not to mention the unmentionable beasts who like to prowl at night. You'll see the lock." He paused, noticing something. "And tell your diminutive friend that he is under no obligation at all to join us. He need not feel awkward in the least. Of course, it is too bad that he will miss out on my fresh clover honey." Suddenly, I heard a slam up the tunnel. Seconds later, Shim stood beside me. "I changes my mind," he said sheepishly. The man closed the book, replaced it on the shelf behind his chair. Nothing like a good read to finish a day of good reads. Despite myself, I grinned. I have never seen so many books. The man nodded. "Stories help me. To live, to work, to find the meaning hidden in every dream, every leaf, every drop of dew." I blanched. Had Bronwyn said almost the same thing to me once? "I only wish," continued the man, "that I had more time to enjoy them. These days, as you surely know, we have other distractions." "You mean the goblins and the like?" "Yes, but it is the like that I most dislike." He shook his head gravely, pulling down another book. "That is why I have so little time for my favorite stories now. I am trying to find some sort of answer in the books, so that Finkyra's own story does not have to end before its time." I nodded. "The blight is spreading." Without looking up from his book, he replied, "So it is. Sophocles, do you know the Greek playwrights? Had a stunning phrase. In Oedipus, I recall, 'A rust consumes the buds,' and that is indeed what has been happening to our land. Rust, consuming the buds, consuming everything." He pulled down another book and placed it on top of the first one, still on his lap. "Yet we mustn't lose hope. The answer just might lie hidden in some forgotten volume. It's worth a look in every book." He raised his head, looking slightly embarrassed. "Forgive the rhyme. They just slip out, it seems. Even if I stop making them, I can't. As I was saying, there are sages in these pages." He cleared his throat. "But enough of that now." He waved toward the pantry. "Are you hungry? Do help yourselves. Honey on the left by the plums. Bread of many kinds are there, twice baked in the manner of the Slantos to the north." "I have not heard of them," I confessed. "Not surprising." The men went back to flipping through pages. "Most of those northerly reaches are unexplored and uncharted, and considered the lost lands. There may be people there, most unusual people, who have never been visited by anyone." He bent closer to the book, pondering a particular page. "And may I ask your names?" "I am Emrys." The man lifted his head, eyeing me in an odd sort of way. Called? You say it as if you are not sure it was your true name. I bit my lip. What about your companion? I glanced at the small figure who was already at the pantry, devouring some bread slathered with fresh clover honey. That is Shim. And I am Carefree, a humble poet. Forgive me for being too preoccupied to be a good host, but I am always glad to welcome a visitor. He closed the book, still observing me. Especially a visitor who reminds me so much of a dear friend. I felt a strange surge of fear as I asked, what friend might that be? I was a close friend of your mother. The words fell on me with the weight of anvils. My mother? Carefree dropped the books on his lap onto the chair. He stepped over to me and placed a hand on my shoulder. Come, we have much to discuss. Ooh-wee! That's some plot development, y'all. Okay. Tomorrow at 9 p.m. Pacific time, we will read chapter 28 called A Simple Question. All right, thank you for joining me. Have a good night.